Hello, and welcome to the second episode of filmkidasks, the podcast where I ask questions to working professionals in the film industry from the perspective of someone just getting started. My name is Jordan, and today I'm joined by the Canadian director, producer, writer, and showrunner on titles like Ginger Snaps, Man in the High Castle, and Orphan Black, John Fawcett. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, it's great to be here.
So you're a Canadian boy. You grew up in the prairies, and you grew up in Calgary and went to film school at SAIT and then studied at the CFC. What are your thoughts on film schools and programs, and how do you feel they've affected your career?
Well, I guess I don't have a great track record with film school. I had kind of a bad attitude, I guess. So I have kind of mixed feelings about film school. You know, when I was in Calgary and going to SAIT, I guess I had a lot of ego and a lot of I knew better than the instructor's attitude, and felt like there were components of the program that I didn't think I needed. And of course, the institution felt differently than me, and as a result, they kicked me out after my first year. That was a kind of a humbling experience because I was living on my own and had to, spent a year working in bars and in coffee shops and trying to shoot my own film. And it was really in that time, that year after, that I really had a kind of a big dose of reality, which was this shit costs money to make. Like, it's expensive to make films. At the time, it's not as like it is now. You needed expensive cameras and lenses and film. It was not cheap at all. It made me realize that I actually needed to try and get back into my second year of film school, and picked up some classes that I didn't want. I think what my resentment was towards an advertising class and maybe a speech class that I didn't feel like I was necessary for me to become a film director. And I think I also had some resentment towards some of the instructors. I didn't feel necessarily, I felt like I was better than them, which was really stupid considering I was, 20, 21. Just had a big ego. Anyway, I went back, I did another year, and I shot a short film, which was good. And that was the whole point, really, was to get another a 16 millimeter short film made. I used that film. That film did really well for me, and it was the thing that got me into the Canadian Film Centre in Toronto. And and then my experience in Toronto at the Canadian Film Centre, I would say, was mixed as well. I mean, the Film Centre certainly has a lovely reputation for being elite and maybe introducing a young filmmaker from Calgary into the Toronto film scene at a very high level. But what I actually learned there, I don't know. Honestly, it was, at the time, it was not, I was there in 1991, and the program was not particularly well structured. And there was a lot of guest speakers telling war stories, and I didn't feel like I learned much from that. But at the end of the day, it was the Canadian Film Centre, their name, and I made another short film. And those were the important aspects. I would say what you get out of film school is you get community. You get access to gear, if getting access to gear is a problem, and you get shit done because you got people that are that have the same goals in mind. Is it necessary? I'm not certain it is. I don't think, if someone was saying, I really think I can do this without going to film school, I would say, yeah, go for it. If you're ambitious and you think you can pull it off and you've got some friends, because you need friends. You need some talented friends, and you need a script and some ambition, and you need to have some basic understanding of how things work. I would just say shoot films, shoot.
So you've been fortunate enough to, make these features and TV really from the start of your career, that you've been the primary creative voice. You made some short films and then your first feature and then Ginger Snaps. But like many working directors, especially in Canada, you've also worked on shows where you're a guest director. How do you approach working on those projects?
Well, I think the most important thing being a guest director, and that's kind of really, for me, that's been kind of bread and butter, is episodic television and going out and gigging on shows. And that's not an easy accomplishment in itself, just getting a job doing it. of course, once you have the job, the most important thing is to know the show. You know, a lot of shows now, like Orphan Black, for example, was a difficult show for guest directors to come on to, because they really needed to understand where the show was at. Kind of means you got to watch, especially a show with a continuing storyline. You kind of got to watch it from the beginning. You need to be up to date with the show. Sometimes that's not completely possible, but it is really important, I would say, to at least know the show, the season, and the characters and storylines up to your script. So that, because often if you don't, you wind up reading a script and have no clue how it fits into the big, it just generates more confusion than anything else. So it's most important to know the show. And the second thing is to know your script. Know your script inside and out. I just feel like when I show up at a new job, the most important thing for me is to just get to know people and to not be afraid of asking questions. I think sometimes, certainly when I was younger, I was very, it's almost like an ego thing. I don't know, like where you don't want to feel like people think that you don't know what you're doing, or that you're weak somehow, and that asking questions exposes some kind of weakness. I mean, I would say across the board, the mentality of the director is like, people seem to think that if they don't have the answer, if they show any kind of weakness, it means that they're going to be taken advantage of, or they're going to lose their control, or lose their and I just think that that's a load of horseshit. So I think that the most important thing here is I think you just got to ask questions and not be afraid to ask questions. And, I find that sometimes when I've censored myself or thought that maybe this was a dumb question, I'm not going to ask it, that it winds up biting me. And so I sort of think that the only dumb questions are the ones that you don't ask. So, and then I think it's important to get to know your crew and get to know your actors, get to know what production thinks of your actors, because the producers will definitely have an opinion of the actors, what their strengths and weaknesses are, whether the actors are a problem. And then I would say get to know your actors, what your actors think of production and what they think of the scripts. Often a director is a kind of go-between, and he's kind of the one that has to kind of like keep everyone sort of happy, and has to be, so you have to be kind of flexible and compatible and collaborative. I mean, really, and as a guest director, that's just the most important thing. If you go in there like a bull in a china shop and think that you're going to do your thing, I think often that gets everyone's back up. It gets the crew's back up. It gets the actors back, because they've been there longer than you have. You're the guest. So I think show some respect and check your ego at the door, man.
So kind of going off of that, what do you think are the most important skills a director can have?
I think the most important thing, I think you can get help everywhere else, but I think that the most important things is know how to talk to actors, know the script, know the character motivations, know your scene requirements, backwards and forwards. No one can talk story or motivations that you haven't already thought about. Everyone else will help you with everything else. All the technical stuff, all the technical mumbo jumbo, there's a ton of it, right? And some directors are good at it and some aren't so good at it. The thing is, there is a ton of technical people on set to help you with that shit. There is nobody else other than you to deal with the actors and the script. You're the only one. So that is, if you're going to put your time and into training as anything, I would make it about script and actors and blocking and understanding story structure. Not just my job as the director, I'm going and I've got to like move people around and move cameras around, but understand the characters and understand each of those actors out there. They're both got their little character, and that's their whole world, and they're following that storyline through the whole thing. And you need, as a director, to understand that. You need to not just understand it, you need to have almost gone through that journey on your own with that character. Often with a script, when I'm preparing with a script, I will literally read the script following one character's journey and make character notes and understand that character's journey, and then read it again through the eyes of another character. So that I kind of really, I have the answers, and I've thought through that stuff for the actors. And that's, I think the most important thing. The other thing that I could say is I really believe that the script is the thing that dictates the style, not the director. The script dictates the style of the show. So often I find directors, especially younger directors, doing too much, or forcing a specific style on a scene that doesn't need it and doesn't want it, and the style isn't supporting the writing. Everything that you do as a director has to support the writing, and has to support the story, and has to support the storytelling.
So kind of going off, working with actors, I'm sure your process has evolved a lot over the span of your career. So what were do you have any big learning moments that you can share, or any advice besides kind of going through the script and using that as a Bible that you can share on working with actors?
I don't know if I have any big learning moments. I just know that the way learning how to speak actor lingo is something that evolved for me. It didn't start, even though I did quite a bit of acting when I was in high school. I did some acting after high school, which I think is kind of like an aspect of directing that I think is important for everyone, that you have been on the other side of the camera. Like, taking acting classes is a great way to understand actors, and is a great way to learn how to talk to actors. I have to say, when I was younger, I was a little bit freaked out by actors. I think I was a little scared of them, a little intimidated by them, and never really knew what they wanted to hear. And I don't know that, I think that in the beginning, I was probably just giving quite rudimentary direction, like, cross here, longer pause here. It was probably really basic and didn't have a lot of complexity or depth to it. And it was probably also from my own fear and insecurity. That's not something that you just get first time out. I mean, it's like learning, it's like exercising any muscle. It's like you need to do it. You just need to do it over and over and over again, and you just get more comfortable with how to speak to them. But it certainly helps, I think, to have been on the other side, to do it from the other side, to have been directed by someone else. Listen, I think that something that happens to directors a lot, because there's a lot of shit going on. The clock dictates your day, and that dictates your stress and anxiety level. But it's not just this day, it's the next day, and it's the day after that. Because constantly, when you're sitting there in the chair, people are coming up to you and saying, "Hey boss, tomorrow, what have you got in mind for this?" So you're constantly being dragged away from the scene that you're working on. It's a part of the job that I dislike the most, because I find that I can get scattered quite quickly and then not be focused, not be present with my actors. And so I would say, one of and sounds really, really, really basic, but somehow find this space where you can be very, very hyper present with the actors, so that it's not about, so that you're listening to their performances, you're focused on their performances. Some directors get all caught up in like what the camera's doing. God damn, there's 50 fucking technical people that can look after camera. Like, listen to the actors. Most of the time I like to even get my camera operators to wear a headset and listen to the actors. This is what we're making. We're making the script, and we're making people saying words. And so it's really important to me that we're really, really focused, and then reacting to their performances in a really sort of present way. I think I would often find that I was discovering direction before the actors even did anything. I don't know if you understand that, where I was like, okay, they're gonna do it this time, but after this take, I'm gonna tell them this. And I think that that's just me not being present. That's me not paying attention. That's me somewhere in the future and not here right now. And I think that what actors appreciate is directors that are really focused on the performances, focused on what they just did, what they just saw, because the relationship between actor and director is one of the most important relationships that you can have, because no one else is doing it. It's you and them, and they need to feel like you guys are a team. So they need to feel safe and feel like it's okay to explore and feel like you got their back, and that you're not going to sell them short. You're not going to make them look stupid. If an actor wants another take, another take. Like, yeah, so time's ticking, but like anything that is going to make them comfortable, because you want a mutual trust between the two of you.
So it sounds like a lot of it is about creating boundaries on set and listening. What are the other kind of components to creating a good set environment?
Well, it's the attitude that you show up with. There are key people on set that are responsible for creating the atmosphere, that are responsible for creating the culture on set. Actors, cinematographer, director. If any of those people are negative or are screamers or screaming and yelling, or I think that those are the people that can be, those are the people that I find that can be negative. I don't like a lot. I mean, obviously raising your voice is sometimes it's necessary. The set starts getting loud or noisy, or people aren't paying attention, and the first AD needs to speak up and be a presence. He needs to be a presence. He doesn't need to be a screamer. I don't think screaming and shouting gets us very far. And my whole thing is just showing up with enthusiasm and passion and energy, and show up and be a hard worker. Be as hard a worker as anybody else there. Like, I can understand anxiety and stress. That's what the job is, right? But I think it's really important to find a way to hide that. People don't want to see your stress and anxiety. They want to see someone who is calm and confident. That doesn't mean to say that you need to have all the answers, but stress and anxiety and freaking out and potentially screaming and shouting. This is I see this often from directors when they get under the gun, they get under stress, and it's really about knowing yourself and being able to kind of like manage situations with a calm head. And I think and also with some humor. Like, I really think that this job needs a sense of humor. We're not exactly saving lives here at work. This isn't an ER. I think it's good to just kind of have a little levity about the work that we're doing.
For sure. So obviously a lot of your job centers around these relationships and creative partnerships. How do you foster those working relationships with producers, cinematographers, actors, etc., to achieve your vision, but also a collaborative environment?
I don't know. I think that the first thing is I have to show up, and I have to be really careful about my attitude. I have to be really careful about my ego. I want to show up. I want to be enthusiastic. I want to show that I care about other people. And that seems like a really silly, that's almost like a basic life lesson. But it's important. It's important that the people that you're working with believe that you care about them. And not just about their job, but about them as people. So there's some key relationships that you need to have be very, very functional. That is your relationship in the beginning. It's your relationship certainly with the writing room or the showrunner, with the production designer, because these are the people that you're going to see first, with the producers. And then you're going to need to make sure that you're having a strong collaborative relationship with your cinematographer and with your actors. It's just wanting to be not a rigid person, and wanting to be flexible, and wanting to be open, and wanting to be available to explore ideas. If you are not a person who is a good communicator, this job potentially is not for you. Like, this is really a place where you need to work on communication skills and people skills. So it's people that are really having ambitions or dreams of being a director. The things that they don't teach in film school is leadership skills. I think that is really something that kind of we can all work on, because they are aspects of our real lives. And I think if we can show up and be authentic and be and even show some vulnerability and not be rigid, like this is my show, this is my plan, that's how you kind of get people to, when people feel like that you need them and you want their opinion, this becomes a Spike Lee joint. It's not the John Fawcett show. It's us as a group working together to create something super fucking cool. That's the idea, right? You want people to think that we're making something together. This isn't, we're not sitting and writing novels here. We need a dedicated group of people to make stuff. So, the morale and keeping the band together is the most important thing. And I think that, for example, when I think about the things that I'm most proud about with Orphan Black, it was putting together, I was entirely responsible for hiring the crew there and all of the keys. And I feel like I put together a crew that stayed together for 5 seasons, and it was a very close-knit, very intense family feel to that entire show. So I was very selective about the people that I let into that group. And because I didn't want that feeling to go away. I wanted the feeling to stay, and I wanted everyone to feel like they belonged and felt loved and felt needed. I think that that's kind of what I have to say about relationships. I think that to some degree just sort of spills into our personal lives. It's just a kind of a way to sort of live. But certainly as we go to the set and we need to be a person who is showing up with confidence and is able to make decisions and is able to collaborate and be flexible and to go to set with an attitude of discovery. Be super prepared, be hyper prepared, but be ready to dump it all at a moment's notice. Like if something's going to happen every day, something happens to wreck your plan. If you think that you're going to go and shoot your plan, you're in for a big shock. So it's much better to go, I've got a plan, and just know that your plan is going to get fucked up. And so and be ready and be excited to go, okay, here's where, because it gets all chargy, you get this adrenaline charge when suddenly it's like, oh my God, I don't have a plan anymore. The plan has been pulled out from underneath me for whatever reason. And now you're just free falling. And I love the feeling. And some people get lose their shit. They need a plan. We got to stick to the plan. And that's a recipe for disaster. So I think being prepared that things are going to fall apart is important. And then if you have all these great talented people who got your back, you're in much better shape. But if you've treated them all like it's my way or the highway, when the plan gets fucked up, they ain't got your back. They're going to go, you figure it out.
Fair enough.
And that's one of the things, like in the end, who gets blamed all the time? Doesn't matter what it is, the director.
So you've kind of talked about the important parts of, what makes a good director and how to bring the right energy to set. But what makes, because a lot of us film students are going to be entering the workforce soon or at some point. So what makes a great member of a set? How can we show up and bring our best and kind of work our way up the ranks? What makes for a good member of the industry?
A good member of the industry.
Whatever that means.
Well, you know all the answers to this, don't you? It's just like it's attitude. Attitude is the most important thing. And be responsible. And know the script. Read the goddamn script. Like there's so many people that go to set, they go to work, they have no clue what they're shooting. I would say 70% of the crew that go and work on a show haven't read the script. Maybe even higher. So it's kind of shocking a little bit that these people are going to work every day, working a job, and they don't know they don't kind of know what they're making. So I just find that I'm always sort of gently encouraging crew to, I like to talk to everybody and I like to get them excited about what we're shooting. So even if it's a third grip or a props assistant or an electric or whoever it is, or a painter, I like telling them I'd like to tell them excited, enthusiastic stories about what we're shooting so that people are so I would say, as a crew member, Yeah, no, read the script, get the script, read the script, and show up, be on time, and go the extra mile. Like, just be enthusiastic about being there. And I think that positive attitude goes a long ways. Being obviously smart and capable is nice. You know, I think that you know, but not complaining, because, like, you know, there's lots to complain about. There's lots of long hours. There's lots of crazy things that happen, you know, but never disparage the show, never disparage the script, the producers, the actors, the crew, anyone. Never disparage anyone. You can talk to your friends offset about how much you hate certain people or the director or whoever it is that is irritating you, but never ever say anything like that on set, because you want to keep a positive attitude. People that show up negative attitudes, complain, are late, or make excuses, they don't come back. So that's be on time. Have your shit prepared. If you have to have stuff prepared, have it prepared.
So I think that's great advice. And I think that obviously is very intuitive, but it's also important to hear sometimes. But having worked on projects with a variety of budget sizes, crew sizes, and kind of on the larger end, because you have done that, what's the best and worst parts of that? And then what's the best and worst parts of working on smaller projects?
I think, you know, they're pretty obvious answers here too. I mean, the more money there is, the more money that's getting spent on something, the more people are paying attention. Everyone's paying attention. So unless you're like, you know, Steven Spielberg, or you're like someone who, you know, is like David Fincher, who's just like, I'm going to make my movie my way, and it doesn't matter how much it costs. You guys can go all wait over there in the back while I shoot my movie. That's just not generally how the film industry works. So the bigger the budget, the more eyes, the more cooks in the kitchen. I mean, really, there's just so much more. There's so many more people looking over your shoulder. And the more money that's getting spent, obviously, the more stress and pressure comes with that. The upside of that is, you know, you know, you can get the things that the things that are in your mind that you hope and dream for, like the 200 background in tuxedos and party dresses, or the you know, the 50-foot techno crane, or the steady cam that you need for 3 days in a row, or C camera on a bunch of different days. You know, these are all things that are perks of having a bigger budget. You know, having like stunts and cars and doing stuff like that, stuff that's on a big scale. I mean, it's really incredible to work on a big canvas. There's no question, but it definitely comes with an anxiety level. I think often if there's a good producer working on the show, and this producer knows the show and knows how to run the show, I think that he buffers a lot of that anxiety with the director. But if there isn't, then, you know, the director can get hit from a lot of different angles. So it's a job not for the faint of heart, but yes, it's a beautiful thing to see gigantic shots happen in front of your eyes. On smaller shows, I think it's just an intimacy. It's a real, like, keeping a close-knit group of actors and creatives together and doing shit the way you want to. There's obvious limitations. I find that sometimes if I'm given limitations, I'm given parameters, they're like, you can't actually shoot that because we don't have the money to do it. That I wind up coming up with very creative solutions. And sometimes the solutions, these creative, budget-conscious solutions, are more interesting than what was on the page to begin with. Sometimes that's just coming up with a style that supports a low budget kind of approach. Sometimes that's like, well, why don't we just not see it? Why don't we come up with a creative way to not see the big event, the big expensive event, come up with a cool way to, you know, make it so that it's not necessary to see it. It happens off camera. Work with the writer. A lot of the time, having a relationship with the writer, and the writer being on your side, if you're not the writer, then working together to solve budget issues, that's really important. So there's another really important relationship to have is to be on the same side with your writer.
So, what would you say is to you the most important part of the process? Is it the prep? Is it the, being on set? Is it the editing room? What to you is the most important part and the part where you're able to author your voice the most and tell your story the most?
Well, the most important part is the script. It's always the script. It's always the script. The script has to be as good as it can be. It's always about the script. So every phase of production is different and important. Prep and script kind of go together to some degree. If you're on a show where you are working with a writer or writing it yourself, so often the development period of writing that leads up to prep is a really important process for the director and the writer. On Orphan Black, my partner Graham was the writer and I was the director, and we worked together on all of the creative aspects of the show, usually for a number of weeks before getting the writing room together. So we would go off to a cottage or a cabin and just shoot the blue sky and jam on ideas and form a kind of all the tent poles for the season and come up with the story arcs. Sometimes that was more detailed, sometimes that was less detailed, but it was always about script. And then once we're in prep, it's still about the script. It's taking obviously all the meetings, but as you begin to take meetings, as all the different departments show up and they start to bring questions, those questions impact the story. Because a lot of the time they'll show up in the last questions and they'll be like, what is this about? And you're like, good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'll find out. And then it is a script thing, and the screenwriter can either give you an answer or go, actually, I never thought of that. So the whole process of prep through all the meetings, because if you've been what you'll come to see, you probably have already had some experience with it, is as you're prepping, there are a number of different meetings. There might be a stunts meeting, there might be a sets meeting, there might be a big production meeting that kind of covers everything, a visual effects meeting. And that is then showing up and just with a visual effects supervisor who's going to just ask about the visual effects. And often those things impact story and script. So then it's taking the information from that back to the writer and trying to incorporate this into new drafts. So the script is evolving constantly during prep. So it's script.
So I'm going to ask one last question before I open this up to everyone else. But just more personally, a lot of your work centers around themes of adolescence and coming of age. What draws you to those stories, and why do you think they're important to tell?
I don't know what the answer to that is. Maybe just because I identify with teenagers more than I identify with adults. Maybe it's just because I feel like I never actually grew out of being a teenager. Or maybe it's just a very transformative time. My first feature film was called The Boys Club, and it was a kind of a coming of age story. It was a kind of probably making references that you might not know, but there was a movie called River's Edge back in the early 90s, I think. And then there was another movie called Stand By Me, and River's Edge and Stand By Me kind of was inspiration for telling a kind of rite of passage sort of story about, boys becoming men in a way, in a sort of a dangerous, provocative sort of way. And then after that, going, I don't really want to, I'm done with guys. Now I need girls. So then it was, making a coming of age story, which was Ginger Snaps, which was about sort of using a werewolf as a metaphor for adolescence, and how girls change. And certainly, I don't know if you've seen the movie, but that's what the whole thing centers on. Is the metaphor of werewolf. I don't know. I don't know if it's, I think it's just a confusing, icky, awkward time in people's life. I wouldn't want to have to go back and relive that, but it's kind of ripe for like kind of icky biological horror or psychological, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm, you know what, maybe what it was is I was just intimidated by adult actors and just felt like it was easier to direct teenagers.
Said no one ever.
I don't, you know, I think that maybe, you know, for a while I didn't think that I was actually going to direct anything with adult actors in it at all. And then fortunately Orphan Black happened. So I've progressed at least.
I mean, even in that show, you get those characters with, you know, you have younger characters, but you also have Helena, who's sort of trapped in this adolescent period. So I find that very interesting. All right, I'm gonna open this up for questions.
So you talked about how directing is based around people skills and communication, and how we don't really learn that kind of stuff in film school. And I was wondering if there was anything that you suggest that we do to actively practice these skills.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I'm not sure if I know what the answer for that is. I think that, I mean, I have things that I think are you know, I think that there's just ways that we can be with ourselves. First of all, for myself, and this is just kind of me, but I have I have had for years a morning practice, a morning meditation practice that kind of I use to kind of get me grounded, and I have a number of different, like, this may sound nuts. It's kind of, I don't know if it's praying or if it's mantras or if it's, you know, setting some intention for ourselves. But this thing of like understanding how we behave in the world and how other people perceive us, I think is kind of important. I often think that the people that I like the most are the people that are the most in tune with themselves. And I think that is, and people that are interested in working on themselves. And I think I think, you know, it's a tricky thing. I mean, I don't know, how do you work on yourself? One of the things that I would say as artists, I think often people, I don't know how to put this exactly. I think that I more often than not, the artists that I know have come from difficult childhoods or have had trauma or have had difficult experiences in their childhood years. And I think that that's something that often people want to ignore and put in the closet and not let out, and keep that all secret or keep that boarded up or not deal with that stuff. I think that showing up and facing that stuff and dealing with, you know, sorting out your family relationships and understanding your origin story and leaning into fear to face that stuff, I think is really a really important way to become better at communicating. I know that sounds kind of weird, but I think that one of the things that I like to tell young filmmakers is figure out why are you here? Like, why are you doing this? Because this is nuts. Trying to do this job in any kind of you know, elite capacity it's an extreme dream. And so anything that you can do to give yourself an advantage, like finding, you know, I like to say, figure out why you're here. Like, why do you want to do this? Like, if you're here for fame and fortune, this is the wrong job. Like, this is the wrong reason to do this. You know, it's not the right, like, your motivations for wanting to do this need to be that's one of the most fundamental things. I mean, if you think that we're going to show up and becoming a director is about all the material wealth in the world or all the beautiful women or men or whatever it is, that's just not the reality of it. So it's about, I think the more I can be a person that is interested in other people, who is genuinely compassionate and understanding and wants to be a part of the world, I think those are the kinds of people that I like and aspire to be. And I think that understanding your origin story is important. I think writing it down is important. I mean, I think that for the longest time, I didn't understand myself. Honestly, I didn't understand myself. I didn't understand why. I felt like I didn't belong in this family. I didn't understand how I'd grown up, I just felt like this total weirdo in my own, like that I didn't fit in. And I didn't understand why, I was obviously grateful for the talents that I developed, but it was nothing like the rest of my family. So I just didn't understand where they came from. It took a lot of getting over a bunch of fear and resistance to going back and looking at, I had difficulties with my father. I had, there was a lot of stuff back there that I was not particularly compelled to go and look at, but get over a little bit of fear, go look at that, actually figure out your origin story. That for me was a big, big moment. Understanding that stuff and putting all that fragmented bullshit in its place made me into a better person, into a better director, and frankly, into a better communicator. And one of the other things I think that you can do, and I would just say this sort of across the board, is regardless of whether you think you're a writer or not, write. It's the most important creative aspect of this job. I don't know if that makes you a better communicator. I think it probably does, because I'm not specifically talking about creative writing. Although I think that needs to be a component of any director's work, is that they should be an avid reader and an avid watcher of movies and an avid writer. And I think writing is a thing that you should be doing every day. For me, journal writing is critical. And I think that comes in two forms for me. That comes in the form where I write about important things that have happened to me and about how I feel about them. And two, the other part of it is to show up and not know what the fuck I'm going to write. So is to be feeling all fucked up, like something's happened, and I'm feeling messed up. I want an answer from the universe. It's almost a spiritual kind of thing, honestly. The way I talk to God is I write, and so I can start with a little bit of an intention, maybe a question that I want answer to. And just start writing and not know where the writing's going, and be very honest and very open and vulnerable and raw with the writing. Write super fast and don't go back and read it and edit it. And you'll be sort of surprised at how much that opens you up, and how quickly you can find answers that you didn't, and wisdom that you didn't know that you had. And I would also say, just in terms of communication, is we can wind up not listening because we got so much other bullshit going on in our heads. We got like the committee, right? There's a committee going on in our heads, and there is someone that's saying you're not good enough, and there's someone saying that you're hearing your parents saying that what you're doing is you're never going to be able to achieve what you're doing. So many different voices going on in your head that are negative. And I think it's important to find ways to quiet that stuff down so that we can be present, because being present is the way we channel creativity. And the way that we communicate well is that we listen well. And the only way to listen well is to be present. So I would encourage you guys, listen, I've been around the block a little bit. I've had so much static and so much shit going on in my background, gone through periods where I didn't think I could be creative again. And every single time, the things that brought me back were having a meditation practice and writing, constantly writing, just constantly writing. It doesn't matter whether it's good or not. It doesn't matter whether it's the next blockbuster or whether we're going to shoot this or not shoot it, whether it's going to be a novel or a play. It doesn't matter. Be creative and keep nurturing that. The more often you can show up and just write and not be critical of what you're writing, the better communicator you'll be, the better filmmaker you'll be. That's kind of the way I roll, man.
So yeah, I have a question about Ginger Snaps, particularly about the relationship of Bridget and Ginger, because they have such a unique chemistry. And I just want to know, did you have like rehearsal practices to kind of make that chemistry happen, or was it something you looked for in the audition process? Like, how did you get that relationship?
Well, that was really an absolutely necessary aspect to the story, to the script. They were kind of, the whole thing for them was, together forever, out by 16 or dead in this scene, together forever. That was the whole concept, right? This was actually supposed to be a kind of a love story between two sisters. I don't know if you ever saw one of the movies that really sort of inspired that feeling was I think in the 90s, there was probably a not well-known Peter Jackson movie called Heavenly Creatures. And Kate Winslet was in it, and I hadn't seen Kate Winslet before. And there was another actor who I've seen. Anyway, the two of them were basically this inseparable, it was a love story between two girls. And of course they went on to kill their parents, and, it was obviously turned into mayhem and murder. But I loved that relationship. And that was this dangerous love story. And so that was that was an absolutely critical part that we had to get right. The chemistry we had to get right. The two characters are fairly different. Ginger is a little more gregarious, a little bit more extroverted. And Bridget is probably the smarter of the two, more introverted, reserved, fearful of the world, and uses her sister as kind of a shield when they go out there. So looking for, in the audition process is where you're looking to find those qualities, those kinds of aspects that the actors bring this energy and understanding of the scenes to the audition room. And as a director, you want to kind of like give them some help and support in the audition process. So auditioning, we could probably do a whole Zoom meeting just on how to be a director in the audition room. But got very fortunate because both of those actors were from Vancouver, and they knew each other. They had worked previously together. So there was already this familiarity. They knew each other and liked each other. And so we were obviously already ahead of the game by the fact that they had that relationship. And then, yes, when you're shooting on not a big budget and you don't have, you have limited time, it's really important that you can, out of the gates, you can hit it out of the gates. You don't have time to stand around on set trying to get the actors to understand the scenes or their characters. So it's really important, certainly in a feature film, that you get rehearsal time with the actors. And even if it's not specifically to read scenes, it's to go through each scene as a director and talk about the scenes and talk about the characters and have open dialogues about what is the scene about? What's the important, what are we trying to accomplish in this scene? What is each character trying to accomplish? And then have them read it and have them field any questions that they have about it. So you want to just give them as much information and as much background as possible in the rehearsal. It's more important than actually reading or trying to stage the scenes, is to just talk about it and make sure your actors really, really clearly get what the writing's about. Because often the actor is just kind of like making stuff up in their own head. It's really, they're hyper-focused on their part. They're not looking at the big thing. They're not looking at the big story. And sometimes we have to rein in actors and make sure that they understand that the function of their character is to do X, and it's great to paint a character with lots of different shades and variations, but at the end of the day, it still has to achieve this function. Because often, unless it's often parts that are not necessarily lead parts, they're very functional roles. We want them to show up with as much complexity as any of the other roles. We don't want to like just blow them off because it's a smaller part. We always want to treat all actors give them as much respect and time as possible. But always remember, this is a much bigger picture, and the director has to keep the entire big picture in his mind. And so and sometimes you just got to go, hey, with an actor, an excited actor is like, yeah, but I'll tell you what, if you do that, then it's going to affect this part down here. And that part down there is really important story point. So, and they don't see that because they're not holding the whole story in their head the way we are. So it's really just getting I think the rehearsal time is a really important part of getting everyone on the same page and making sure everyone understands what they're doing so that we can work quickly and efficiently when we get to set.
I actually have a more personal question, just because I feel like we can all connect on that. I was wondering if you remember the moment or the film or a short film that really made you realize that film could be a potential career, and if you're looking back now, does that reveal something about your understanding of the importance of film to you and to like the world?
Well, I don't know if there was one particular film that I was inspired by that made me. I was always just very like into films, from the beginning. I mean, I'm a very different era than you guys. So for me, the film, I was, I was probably 9 years old when like Star Wars came out, so Star Wars it kind of changed everything for a lot of people. I don't know that Star Wars necessarily made me think I want to be a filmmaker, but it certainly kind of blew my mind and made me start thinking about movies in a very sort of different way. I think, I have a difficult time talking about favorite movies or movies that totally inspired me. I think about people a lot. I think it's funny because I know that Steven Spielberg was definitely a guy that arrived on the scene when I was young and starting out, that was a huge inspiration to me. And so he had made, I don't know if you know much about his career, but one of his first films was Jaws. And Jaws to me probably fits into easily my top 10, maybe even my top 5 favorite films of all time. I think it's an incredible landmark, Moby Dick of a movie. But the thing that I found most inspirational about him, and what he did is he made Jaws, then I believe he made Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and then I think he made Raiders of the Lost Ark. And those are all like unbelievable movies all in a row. And no matter what you think of him, for me, he was a young guy. Like, he was incredibly young and working at an extremely high level. And I found that incredibly inspiring. I mean, when he made Jaws, I think he was like 24 years old, something like that. I mean, how old are you?
18.
So 18. So 6 years from now, he was making Jaws. It's kind of mind-blowing. And so that to me was so like, I was like, if he can do it, I can do it. So, when I went to film school, obviously it became uncool to like Spielberg. Everyone was like, Spielberg, he makes kids movies, right? He makes E.T., he makes kids movies. And so I never ever, I kind of got embarrassed of calling him an inspiration. But then Spielberg went on and made Schindler's List, which is one of the most important films I think that has ever been made. To me, he was just a role model. Like, I don't know, he was more than just, to me, like finding a role model that you feel that you can kind of emulate, I think is really important. I mean, do you remember, well, maybe you don't. It was, Michael Jordan was this famous basketball player. I don't know, when was he famous? He was famous in like the 90s, I suppose. And there was all these like, these commercials that said that the whole slogans were like, be like Mike, right? And that inspired a generation of kids. And I think about that a lot. When I discovered Spielberg as a kind of a strange, imaginary mentor for myself. It was more than just I liked his movies. I watched anything that I could get on and watched how he communicated, how he talked to actors, how he handled himself in interviews, how he was with his family. And it just became a kind of a thing where I didn't know how to be a director, and I didn't have friends that were directors. I grew up in Calgary. I figured this out by myself. I didn't get to go on sets and see I had to like watch behind the scenes documentaries and stuff like that and watch interviews. And I was just a scared kid. I was terrified of it all. In fact, like when I was so scared that I didn't think I could even go to set and do it. Like I remember throwing up in the morning before going to work and being like just so nervous that I didn't think I could handle it. So the way I dealt with it was to kind of create the persona of the director. And that was kind of like, so that came from like using an imaginary mentor like Spielberg, who had made all these movies and was so young that I felt like I could understand him and kind of just went, I'm going to show up, I'm going to act like the director. So whatever the director is, I'm going to show up, I'm going to act for 12 hours and I'm going to be an actor. I'm not going to be a director, I'm going to be an actor, and I'm going to act like the director. And my inspiration was like people like Spielberg. And so I would say if anything was inspirational and was responsible for making me go, I'm going to make movies, I would say it was him.
When did that change for you? When did you show up at work and not feel like you had to act the director? When did you?
Well, you don't really know that it's happening, because the more you do it, the more it just becomes you. You do it and it becomes you. And that's the way we do anything, right? At some point it just became me, and the more there was aspects of the job that I became that I didn't like. I think that there were aspects of ego and self-centeredness and arrogance that I developed early on, especially when you start getting paid. And those were things that I had to learn a few hard lessons to kind of like make those things go away, because, people will call you on it. Or if you don't check that stuff early, you will potentially, it could potentially lead to not getting work, because people really, the way people get hired is they get hired because their shit is good, that looks good and it is good. And the second way they get hired is because of the reputation, that they get along with everyone. They make their days, they make their schedules, and and people like them. The thing now for me that's so important at this point in my career, this is not maybe so much for you guys, but for me, is just that balance of knowing how to take the director persona and check that at the door like a hat and leave it there, and then become John, the guy that hangs out at home and has friends and is a dad and has family and all that stuff, and isn't the guy that is at set. Because the guy that's at set is kind of a different guy, and he needs to be I don't want to say aggressive, but I'm just a different guy there. I have to be, right? And then at home, I need to be something else. So trying to go back and forth between those two personas has always been challenging for me. What was the quote that Yoda said, do or do not, there is no try? That was a really important, to me, that's a really just an important attitude, and to have some stamina about this, and to expect that this isn't going to just come together like, perfectly with a nice little neat bow on it. It's challenging being an artist and making a living as an artist, and you need some stick with itness. And honestly, what I experienced, and this is just a little bit more advice, is that often I saw that people would just give up. They would give up after a while. It's too hard. I can't live like this. I can't like live not having things. I can't live like an artist. And they would give up. And so I've noticed that the people that wind up in the industry, that wind up getting the jobs, are like the last people standing. And it doesn't matter, like sometimes it isn't even about talent. It's about like stick with itness. It's about good attitude. It's about showing up. It's about not giving up. There's no tomorrow. Like, what if there's no tomorrow? What if, like, you know, you put this stuff off? You're like, I'll do it all. You know, I'll write that thing tomorrow. Okay, what about today? Like, do it today, man. Do it today. Like, stop putting the shit off. Like, I lost years of my creative life because I was just kind of lazy, and I wish I had them back now. So and frankly, when you're getting started, use your youth as an advantage. So go. You have all this energy. And get a thick skin. Don't like take shit personally. Don't give up.
All right. I know you said that you don't like talking about film recommendations or things that you like, but if you do have, I would love to hear 5 film recommendations based on your experience or inspirations, or, you know, think that they have great directing, whatever you want. But I'd love to hear.
You know that there's a bit of any of the people that I'm going to suggest are probably not, you know, I don't know how current I am. So a lot of my suggestions for films are probably almost what you call classic films now, or I tend to find directors that I like and follow filmmakers more than I follow directors that I think are doing interesting, continual, interesting work. Like people like, you know, Christopher Nolan or David Fincher or Alfonso Cuarón. And then there's some older guys that I have always liked, like, you know, Martin Scorcese and Peter Weir. Francis Ford Coppola, you know, he made some of the best movies, you know, Godfather. Go and look at a bunch of, you know, make sure that you've seen The Godfather, for love of God, and Apocalypse Now. The Godfather, like if you look at lists of favorite films of all time, The Godfather is going to wind up in probably the top 10 of everyone's list. I think seeing important films and and really kind of developing a love for and a really the biggest base of understanding of all sorts of different kinds of films is important. I like following directors. You know, I've already talked about Jaws. There's a whole raft of of Spielberg that I love because he was doing something that was very different at that time. If you haven't seen Goodfellas, that's probably one of my favorite Scorsese films. You should see Goodfellas. If you haven't seen Seven, I'm sure has everyone seen these movies? They're all like, so make sure you're familiar with Seven and Fight Club if you want to watch David Fincher. If you want to get familiar with Peter Weir, my favorite Peter Weir film is The Mosquito Coast, which is a movie that I think often has fallen through the cracks. It's a brilliant movie. He also made Witness and Dead Poets Society and Gallipoli. And then Alfonso Cuarón is a Mexican director who made one of my favorite movies. It's like a masterpiece, is Children of Men. And so Children of Men you should see. And then he made Gravity, which you probably saw. Gravity made a lot of money in the theaters. He also, of course, you guys are all probably Harry Potter fans. Well, he made the best Harry Potter movie, which was Azkaban. And he also made this fantastic smaller film called, I hope I pronounce it correctly. I wrote it down. It's Y tu mamá también. It's a road trip movie. It's well worth seeing. Anyway, he's a really, really, truly great director. And then check out, if you haven't seen, I'm sorry, I wrote these down, I'm reading them. I don't know how familiar you are with Chris Nolan, but make sure that you see Memento. So Memento is, for me, Memento was blew my mind, changed everything for me, and was actually the first inspiration for Orphan Black. So that's a movie that is, you know, and it's a lower budget movie. So it actually, when you watch it, it seems like something achievable. Like we could make this. It's not like a gigantic Hollywood movie. It's a small psychological thriller with like a very small cast, and is a, you know, some of these, it's really fun, I think, you know, going and picking some of these filmmakers that are kind of legendary now and watching their earlier films, because they weren't making huge budget movies. Like the other thing you could watch is the Cohen brothers. Watch Blood Simple, their very first feature film. If you haven't seen Blood Simple, that is absolutely worth seeing. And it's really just interesting to see how these people began. So I'm super into origin stories and how things begin, and understanding how we are, what trips us up, what are our pros and cons, what am I successful at, what am I least successful. Play to your strengths, work on your weaknesses. Don't just avoid your weaknesses, work on them. Turn your weaknesses somehow into your strengths.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you. I feel like there's at least a few of those that that we haven't seen yet. So I know there are a few for me that I'm really excited to check out now. And thank you for sharing a little bit about your origin story and your process, your experience. I know I really enjoyed hearing about what you think makes a great set now, but also how that's evolved, and a lot of personal things. I'm really grateful that you shared that with us.
I hope it's been helpful for you guys. I hope I didn't just say a bunch of stuff that was not useful, because I think, just quickly, I mean, you know, like I was saying, when I was at the Canadian Film Center, a lot of directors would show up and they would just talk about war stories. Here's what it was like on set, you know, and here's the different celebrities that I was shot with, and you know, the different little adventures they had on set. And honestly, all that shit starts to sound the same, and it's not helpful. And I want, if anything, I just hope that, like, in some ways I'm able to inspire you, and in some ways I'm able to help in some. So I hope you glean some bit of weird, helpful information out of this. I hope that you guys go out there and kick ass and make some good shit, and make some things that are relevant and that will, you know, entertain and move people. I mean, really, that's what we're doing. We're not out there to, it's great if we can make a living doing it, but we're not out there for fame and fortune. We are out there to share ourselves. We're out there to share stories that move people emotionally. That's what's so important.
Thank you so much. No, I think you did a great job at sharing that and sharing some really solid advice. A lot of it seems very intuitive, but I think it's also important to talk about those things. And I think there was some very practical advice that we can take with us. So thank you so much.